Well, it looks like we're right on time, and we're going to begin this next session. We'll allow you to grab your coffee or your tea. Sean Finn has pulled together a terrific team of folks to talk about one of these overriding issues that we deal with in the LCC network and all of us in our day-to-day works, and that is data management. And Sean is going to spend the next hour sharing the podium with individuals that he'll introduce briefly when he gets up here, talking about best practices approach to data management. Real briefly, I'll introduce Sean, and then we'll turn it over to him. But Sean became the science coordinator for the Great Northern LCC in January of 2011, after 11 years as an ecologist with the USGS. As you no doubt know, his primary focus is the broad-scale wildlife habitat relationships and effects of landscape-scale disturbances on ecological systems and processes. His secondary focus up there is keeping Rick Soja in line. I won't tell you which one is the harder of the two jobs, but with that, I'll turn it over to Sean.
Thanks, Mike. Is this one working? We're wasting time already. So thanks everyone for coming today. You know, data management is something that everyone thinks about a little bit, but no one wants to spend all their time on. And so we put together a working group at the LCC network level, and I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about what the progress that working group has made to this point, and then introduce several of our partners from across the nation here to talk about various perspectives on data management, sort of from the outside the LCC perspective. You know, a wise person once said to me that data is the currency of science, and so it means a lot in a lot of different ways. So the LCC Network Data Tools and Information Management Working Group was established at our national meeting last spring, I believe it was, in Georgia. And that's where we pretty much established all of these working groups. And our charge was to determine if there was a need for an LCC network scale geospatial data management and sharing system. That was an easy charge to determine because we figured that out right away. It was something that was important. And then our task is to create an LCC data management best practices guide that provides comprehensive guidance for all our partners, both within and outside the LCC. We expect to have a final draft done this summer. Just briefly, the folks that are involved with this working group are primarily from various LCCs across the nation and some support that we get from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The one main exception is Emily Fort with the National Climate Change Wildlife Science Center, who's with us today. I want to let everyone in the room know that this working group is open to participation, and we would encourage you to join us. The more the merrier, and the more information we can get and put together for this best practices approach, the better it will be for all. And we take this best practices approach because, as you all know, each of the LCCs has this sort of regional autonomy, and the decisions are made by the steering committees in each one of these LCCs. So there isn't a lot of top-down, heavy, federal kind of mandates about what these various LCCs are supposed to do. Yet at the same token, a lot of these things like monitoring protocols, data management, climate downscaling, all those things, they have cross-cutting value to all the LCCs. So we want to take the approach where we can figure out as an LCC network, and that is the broad partnership with all our partnerships, can identify the best ways to handle these cross-cutting issues and then provide that information to the steering committees to let them make informed decisions. And the trick is to ensure that the guidance is compelling to each one of these steering committees, but also linked with all of our partners so that they understand where the LCCs are going, and we make these decisions as a community of practice. So we've, to this point, developed a pretty strong draft for a three-part process for best data management practices for the landscape conservation cooperatives. The first part that we've developed most fully is determining best practices for handling data that's delivered through LCC-funded science. So many of the LCCs have the ability to provide funding for science, and what we're suggesting in this first draft here is that there should be standard practices for collecting, managing, and archiving that data, delivering it to all of our partners. So to develop these practices, we've used some of the standard sources that you might be familiar with, geographic data standards from FGDC, also the International Organization for Standardization. A lot of our inspiration was given by the National Climate Change Wildlife Science Center and how they're working with the regional CSCs to develop data management, sharing policies, and also developing data management plans. We also, reach out to as many sources as we can to figure out, what's going on across the nation and across the globe and what's working best. As I said, we have approached, on the bottom part of the screen here, we've approached the first topic there, which is LCC-funded science. Over the course of the next couple of months, we're going to work on this sort of cross-LCC data sharing and integration standard or recommendations, and then talk about the broader community. So, in honor of opening day for baseball, in case you didn't recognize it, the games began, and we're going to have a lineup today. Leading off is Emily Fort, who I've mentioned now from the National Climate Change Wildlife Science Center. Batting second, Leslie Honey, and they're sitting in order down over here from NatureServe. Jim Stritholt from the Conservation Biology Institute is batting third. Whitney Albright from California Fish and Game hitting cleanup. And then Tim Kern will finish us off. He's from the USGS Fort Collins Science Center. So, Emily?
So hi, everybody. Thanks again for coming. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the National Climate Change and Wildlife Science Center, we're the part of USGS that's helping to establish the climate science centers. And so what I'm going to be talking today a little bit is kind of the basics, hopefully something that's obvious to all of you. But why invest in data management? I am responsible I was hired to do data management and information technology coordination for all of the CSCs, which is kind of a great investment that USGS made in making sure that we were going to be doing data management and encouraging that. And so some of the reasons, just really quick, why that's important are just it does encourage data sharing. One thing we've heard over and over again in this meeting is the importance of being able to share information and find it and make decisions based on good information. So that requires it to be available. It enables data integration. There's lots of things. You may want to take a downscale climate model and some habitat information and see what might happen. And if that information isn't based on some standards and isn't integratable, then it's not going to work quite as well. Data aggregation as well. We have 22 LCCs, which are all going to be doing really neat stuff. The power is also going to come from being able to take work that's being done in one LCC and some neighboring LCCs and join that together and put together a bigger picture. And again, that requires doing some data management, understanding what you have, and managing it well. And then it can also just do basic things, save times, simplifies your research, and protects against data loss. So how are we doing this with the climate science centers? So I formed a collaborative working group that has representatives from the CSCs, the LCCs, the universities that are involved with the CSCs, and just some other data management experts. And we've been working to come up with some common policies and guidance, and have really been trying to found everything on the use of open standards and community efforts. We don't want to reinvent a wheel. We don't want to start from scratch. We want to take advantage of what's out there and build on it. So how are we doing that? The first thing we did was a data sharing policy that said any work done through the Climate Science Center, that data has to be shared at the end of the project. And that's just there from the beginning. We've also required a data management plan for all of our proposals. So starting in FY 2012, any CSC proposal has to have a data management plan, and that plan has to evolve into a more extensive research data management plan for the projects that are funded. And we're also leveraging existing tools and capabilities. As I'm sure you guys are all aware, there's a ton of stuff out there. People have been doing really good things. There's no need to build yet another portal or yet another tool if I can take advantage of what's there and just figure out how to knit them together. And also we want to collaborate with many different partners. Obviously the CSCs and LCCs have a strong partnership, but there's lots of other groups doing really good stuff, and we want to be able to work with them as well. So, as I mentioned, all of our proposals are going to start requiring a data management plan as of 2012. We also are going to be putting data managers in all of the CSCs that I'm going to be working with centrally to help the researchers understand data management and do it. I know for some it's a stronger skill set than others, and we want to make sure that we get good information, so we're going to be helping with that. And we're working on really making this happen, working on the implementation. We have a vision of where we want to go, so this year is really about connecting the dots. So next up is Leslie Henry.
I am actually kind of disappointed I don't have that halo effect that the speakers had yesterday. It kind of gave you a higher authority, in your presentation. But I'm here to talk about NatureServe's approach to data management and delivery, and I'm not embarrassed to say that this is something near and dear to our hearts. We actually get excited about this discussion. Just a little background, if you don't know NatureServe, we're a nonprofit organization, and we represent an international network of natural heritage programs in the United States, Canada, and Latin America. We currently have we have 82 programs that are located in 14 different countries. And our mission, our lofty mission, is to provide the scientific basis for effective conservation. And we focus on really a couple of key questions. We focus on answering what exists within the geographic area of our focus, where these things are, where those species populations are, or those ecological communities, how they're doing. We do a lot of status assessment work. And then what are the priorities for protection or management? And then what is needed to ensure that we're able to sustain those priorities? So the way that we in order for us to kind of accomplish these goals, we've developed this value chain, what we call a value chain, to kind of help us think through that whole process. And you'll notice the first thing on that chain is scientific standards and methods. We spend a lot of time as an organization and a network talking about standards and methods and how we can capture the consistency of applying those standards in tools that we develop across the network, how we can leverage each other's work. And that really allows us, whether we're doing data collection in the field, pulling that data into a local management system, or then aggregating that up into a national aggregated database or international aggregated database, it really allows us to then use that information because it's consistently gathered and managed to answer some of the questions that we are trying to help answer in the community to guide that effective conservation action. So we've been doing this for actually close to 40 years, and I have felt every single year of doing it. And, the lessons learned, you all know what the lessons learned are going to be. We have to have standards, but we have to be flexible. I think that it was talked about a lot yesterday. There has to be skin in the game. I'm not really sure what that means, but I think that the thing is, it's a little creepy to me, but yeah, you know what I mean? Obviously the message there is that you've got to have complete participation. This is a collaborative effort. We spend a lot of time collaborating across our network and, of course, across the conservation community, the international community. When you're talking about standards, you really have to look at that, what's going on, and working towards being interoperable and being able to share information across the spectrum. Of course, you want to focus on a standard core set that you are all going to be working towards, but you have flexibility. In a given member program, they may have requirements that are unique to their area, and we have to make sure, because we do also develop tools that support them, that these tools are flexible and that, yes, we're all doing this basic stuff, but you have the ability to do other things. I think the other thing is also because we develop tools, we want to make sure that we co-evolve. Setting standards is an ongoing process. It's an evolution as science evolves, as technology evolves faster and faster, and as our challenges evolve, we need to evolve. And so whenever we're looking at our methods, we need to make sure that our tools are following in line to support what we're trying to do and vice versa. So just to give you a sense of where we are today, the tool that we develop, which is used by a good number of our member programs, is called Biotics. This is the map of the NatureServe network. We have 46 states, Tennessee Valley Authority and Navajo Nation within the U.S. that actually use our data management system. And this is really developed in a lot of ways to just not duplicate effort. You know, you do it once and everybody takes advantage of having this resource available. We have 6 provinces and territories in Canada. Also, the Parks Canada Agency is using Biotics. And in Latin America, which is really our newer region, we've got a few programs, as you can see. So just sort of tying this back in again, what does this give us? Starting with that real basic need to have the standards and the methods, and the tools then to help capture this information in that standardized way. From NatureServe's perspective, we've kind of developed a suite of tools that take you from, once again, the field, pulling in observations, processing it through the rules and standards that we've established in our Biotics software package, which then can feed into our decision support tool. It also then allows us to publish that information, whether it's on our products, like NatureServe Explorer or Landscope America. It also, though, lets us share that information with other partners' applications. So, for example, through web services, EPA is consuming our data into NEPA Assist, the information about where a species is located. We're also working with Fish and Wildlife Service. They're going to be consuming our web and map services into their wildlife tracks application that is under development. And it was mentioned, before that by Emily, that having these consistent methods allowing us to really aggregate this information, we're able to look at a lot of the problems at all of the different scales and compare across different boundaries and so forth. So we can look, the state has their information or the province has their information, but they can look at a regional, multi-regional level within an LCC, at a national or international level. So we utilize the information that's collected a lot ourselves to do the types of analysis that we do and are involved in, but we also try to make this information as accessible as possible. So just to close out where we're going, I think it's really an exciting time for NatureServe because of the evolution and the impressive progression of technology. We currently, our system, which is I think 11th or 12th generation, is a desktop application. Well, we're like everybody else, we're moving to the cloud. It's going to be a hosted web application, ArcGIS server mapping, web service architecture, and there's going to be separate databases for each of our member programs. The real exciting aspect of this is that now we're going to be able to, through our data sharing agreements, we're going to be able to share data between each other on a real-time basis. And also, hopefully, for a number of our programs who face a lot of budget crunches and so forth, hosting this web application will eliminate some of those expenses to each of the programs, as well as because it's hosted, we're able to keep up, which has always been a challenge with the changes in technology. And when we need to add something new to capture some new challenge, it's going to be easier to do it in this environment rather than send out patches to each desktop. So we're really excited about where we're going to be going with this. So I think just in closing, if there's only one thing that we as a network, I think, would wholeheartedly say, having standards and methods and tools that support that is critical. It is so important, and we very much embrace that concept in the work that we do. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Stritholt. I'm President and Executive Director of the Conservation Biology Institute. And we were founded the organization in 1997, and we're a science-based organization. And we are a lot of scientists, but our mission is to bridge conservation science and practice. And so when the Wilberforce Foundation came to us several years ago and said, we'd like you to see if you'd be interested in attempting to build something that would do that in a more wider reaching way. The Project Data Basin was born then. and we've been going strong ever since. Conservation is really about place, and so it was natural for us to move to maps. A core of our business or our work is spatially explicit. We do a lot of GIS, remote sensing sorts of things, but also try to tie it to the ground, and more importantly, try to translate it to people who aren't GIS experts. And so Data Basin works really hard to try to achieve that. In preparing a few comments for this group, it was about best practices, and I can't believe I'm not showing one map. And it's killing me. But I have 5 minutes, and I can't show enough maps to get it out of my system, so I won't go there. But maps tell stories in ways. I've been to all over the world. It doesn't matter of the language. Maps are like campfires, and people get around them, and they begin to think and to dream and to find answers to problems. And so I've always been very attracted to maps, but more importantly, I'm attracted to saving the planet, and that's what we're really trying to do here. Best practices, and again, sorry about no maps. What were we trying to do? What are we trying to do with Data Basin? And we're really talking about interacting with a variety of people, not just GIS experts, not just scientists. Everyone who's engaged in conservation needs to have access and be able to use these things. So access is key. And David Hayes, it's interesting, as I was listening to his 5 bullet points, some of those are the mantras for my team. I tell them, it's all about sharing and getting access, but that's not enough. It's also about staying relevant, and it's also about telling stories, because that's how we remember things. The other thing about Data Basin that's unique in some ways is that we didn't want to build the big data haystack. There are other people who are better at that, and they should be doing that, and we're about trying to translate that and support real social processes and workflows. And of course, we always want to encourage transparency and sharing as much as we can. So when my developers, so we have teams of developers, modelers, and scientists working together to develop this thing, what were some of the things we were trying to achieve? And this would be true for anyone, in my opinion, who's trying to build something that is going to be digested by non-technical GIS people. These are the things that I think are most important. It has to be easy to use. I always kid around with the group. It's like Data Basin's like Google Earth on steroids. And so it's like, what does that mean? Well, my mom can use Google Earth to find the movies or the grocery store or whatever. Now, it's much more sophisticated than that, but it shouldn't be that much hard. I taught my 6th grader his class. I wanted to test it, so I went to a 6th grade class. All 30 kids were making a map in 20 minutes. So if 6th graders can do this, everybody can do this. The other thing that's key, no pressure here, right? We wanted to make sure this is web-based. This is all running in the cloud, but we wanted it to be available to anybody, anywhere. We really wanted to make sure that the experience, yes, we are telling stories, but we wanted to give people the tools to tell their own. And so the user experience has to be controlled by you, not by us. And so we've provided lots of mechanisms for that. It has to be flexible enough to allow customization, and above all, it has to be cost-effective. Incentives are absolutely important. I can't tell you how many times we go back to this. And there are always, and I have to say that building Data Basin, yes, we have overcome a lot of technological barriers to doing this. And we continue to challenge, to wade through the others that remain. But the bigger problems are political and social. Those are the things that will either kill you or make you wildly successful. And here are just a couple of things that we've learned that are really important to people. We have to get credit, has to be recognized throughout. People are always afraid, if I contribute my data, you're going to steal it or you're going to sell it. And so you have to make sure that there's user-controlled ways that they get the credit. People who download data from Data Basin, they always get everything, and they always see who was the generator of that information in the first place. Again, user control is key. Branding is a big deal. People need to be recognized for a variety of reasons, and lots of those reasons are legitimate. And they have to find a platform where they can publish their own work and contribute it. quickly, building blocks in the system, and I'm going to go through this very rapidly. Data sets in this, and the icons are meaningful because it tells people in the system what they're looking at. It's very picture-like in some ways to guide people to help them understand what they're doing here. So data sets is the first thing, and there's spatial data sets. We accommodate a lot of different data types. All the ARC data sets work well. We also have NetCDF for the climate change modelers in the room. That's all native and all works fine. Maps are maps that are created by the users in the system, and you can keep them private, share them with your friends in a group, share them outside the system, or make them broadly available to everyone. People, again, it's not a data haystack. People are important too. We are getting close to 3,700 registered users. It's free to use. And they come from all walks of life. And I watch this every single day because I want to make sure that the people who are joining are not just GIS people and scientists like me. We're not building it for people like me. Those are the power users. They will have value here too. There's incentives for them to participate. I'm worried about everybody else. And people becomes a valuable resource. You can search on who's an expert on salmon, who's interested in whatever the topic, and you will come up with a growing list of people who may be of some help to you. Galleries are our way of publishing collections of things. In fact, I think we're going to change the name to collections because I think it's more intuitive. I'll jump to groups. We have user-defined groups that can be public or private, and they can be real working groups. We have about 200 right now. Some of them are groups of scientists. Some of them are groups of citizens, watershed councils, whatever. You define the working group the way you need it to work. A new thing we're about to add, and stories may not be the right name. We're still working out the details. But this gets to one of David Hayes' other points on yesterday. Was about, you have to show that it's making a difference. And people do learn by stories. And whether we call it that or not is irrelevant. And we're trying to put a place where people can learn from each other. How did I use all these things to generate an answer and share it with other people? That kind of thing. And lastly, our analytical tools. We've got about 8 of them built now. Some of them are as simple as doing filters and selects and overlays and buffers to something more sophisticated. We're actually running models and risk avoidance tools that we're running that work on the fly, and they run in about 30 seconds. You get answers back. Very powerful and very easy to use. Almost through. So this is the current landing page. If you'd like to visit Databasin, or if you have any questions, please come see me or call me or email me. It's databasin.org. This is the landing page. It's getting a facelift. It's going to get even easier to use. We have centers. There is so much data being built. We have about 8,500 data sets now that people get lost in it. So we're taking from the data side, we're taking the haystack and we're breaking it up into digestible pieces. If you're interested in climate change, we have a climate center. We have a boreal information center that we're going to migrate to a global forest conservation center. We just got seed money to get that underway. And we have a protected areas center where we build groups of people to talk about what do we know about these places and what's their probable fate, and can we find solutions. And my last slide, remember I said branding was important. So we've had some who come to us and said, wow, we really like this, but can we have it branded and have that data put into a separate sandbox just for us? Dave Theobald on his plenary yesterday talked about the Yale framework. I'm one of the science panel members. And for that process, we actually have a gateway, and it's databasin.org/Yale. And it will be there with all of the information from the framework and all of the data and all of the pilots. So it's a rich learning place, not just a place to go grab data. And with that, I will close.
Hello, my name is Whitney, not Tom Lupo. And I'm going to talk very briefly about some of California Fish and Game's data management practices and tools, and I'll also mention a few opportunities that we see for LCCs to support some of these practices. So data management at Fish and Game is carried out by our biogeographic data branch, and the data branch is separate from IT, it's separate from admin, it's its own kind of well-developed and permanent program. And the data branch provides general standard setting services with regards to data in the department, and they also provide a GIS support for our other branches, they provide mapping services, and they also generally serve as a clearinghouse for data within the department and also fish and wildlife data within the state. And the data branch and the department take a pretty open and transparent view of data. We try to make as much of it available to as many people as possible. And there are a few exceptions, of course: draft data, data under development, data that pertains to some of the rarest resources in California. But for the most part, we try to maintain a pretty open policy. And we find that this really better serves our purposes than being a little bit more retentive. We're able to avoid having quite as many public records requests, and we also find that it generally kind of increases trust between the department and some of our partners and stakeholders. So I think that there are a few ways that the LCCs could align with some of these data management practices, and I'll talk about those now in the context of a couple different data management tools at Fish and Game. So one of the ways that we make data available to the public is through BIOS, which stands for the Biogeographic Information and Observation Systems. And BIOS is an online interactive system for archiving and viewing biogeographic data, and also for facilitating the sharing of that data between Fish and Game and some of our partners. And so just to give you an idea, BIOS houses information such as our California Natural Diversity Database, individual species ranges, rare species critical habitats, and so on. And this data comes from a variety of sources, so federal agencies, state agencies, NGOs, and other partners, so not just Fish and Game collected data. And BIOS at this point, I think, is approaching around 700 different data sets, most of which are available to the public. And so first, I would encourage the LCCs to utilize these types of resources and these sorts of state databases wherever that's possible, and to encourage their partners to do so as well. And I would also suggest that the LCCs maintain these sorts of open practices with their data. I think many already do that, or at least intend to here in the future. BIOS also serves as a collaboration commons that others can build websites around. And this is just a specific example in California. This is a CalFish website. It's a .org collaborative partner website, but it links directly into the BIOS database. And I realize that this could be difficult depending on how many states correspond to an individual LCC, and also depending on an individual state's data resources. But I think it still serves as a good example of the type of cross-coordination between states and LCCs that we would recommend. So providing this raw data is great, but at the same time it can be a little bit confusing and sometimes difficult to interpret depending on the user group. So one of the things that we're doing at Fish and Game, in an area where I see the LCCs being able to make a big contribution, is by creating these interpretive data layers. So one way that we're accomplishing this at Fish and Game is through our Areas of Conservation Emphasis project, or ACE. And ACE is an online web map viewer where we essentially summarize that raw data in terms of variables that are sometimes more meaningful for management applications, so biological richness and species diversity, et cetera. And ACE was developed to help inform our land acquisition decisions and also to help us identify priority areas for conservation. And this is just a quick view of an ACE map. It has statewide coverage, and different areas are designated as high to low priority. And if you look to the left, you notice that biological richness is determined by a number of different factors, and that those factors are determined by a number of different subfactors. And what you can't see here is that an individual user can actually go in and adjust the weighting of each of those subfactors, depending on who they are and what their priorities are. And so I mention this detail just to demonstrate that this is a highly customizable tool, and that an individual user can go in and change it depending on what their priorities and what their needs are, which kind of reiterates some of the points that were made earlier today. So I would encourage the LCCs to support the generation of these types of interpretive data layers and these value-added products, and specifically those that are customizable so that they can accommodate a pretty wide variety of users. And this is just a quick visualization of ACE, where we have the raw data input coming in at the base and this measure of biological richness coming out the top. And I included this just to kind of serve as a reminder that these tools are only as good as the data on which they're based. And with that being the case, another area where I see the LCCs being able to make a good contribution is by investing in acquiring these sort of foundational data sets, helping us to find out what those critical gaps are and fill those gaps so that together we can continue to move forward and create these interpretive data layers for all partners to use. So just to recap, there are a few potential roles that we see for the LCCs in data management and data management tools. First is supporting generation of these interpretive data layers and tools, supporting investment in that foundational data, and also working with states and other partners to maintain these open data management practices. And I'll stop there.
Hi, Tim Kern, USGS Fort Collins Science Center. And just as Emily pointed out, there's a lot of tools out there that people can take advantage of. You've heard a few of those. I'm going to talk about one more. This is the Landscape Conservation Management and Analysis Portal, or LCMAP, as it's referred to. And this is an option that we're working with the Great Northern Landscape Conservation Cooperative was the founder of this concept. And it started out, yesterday speakers, everybody, at least half the speakers, talked about meeting an on-the-ground need. And this did start from an on-the-ground need. This started from a lot of researchers whining that it was really difficult to collaborate on data sets. They had remote users, they had people, distributed projects, and they had multiple copies of data. They were getting buried with different versions of data, different difficulties, interagency difficulties working with these data sets. And so there was a management need as well, where managers are getting a little bit freaked out about the fact that there were a lot of products out there and they couldn't necessarily keep track of them. So they just wanted to make sure that there was, they wanted to give us one place we can put all these data products. So what this sort of led to, the need led to the goal. And remember yesterday, there's a goal is the why, the strategy is the how. The goal here was to provide a data management workflow that wasn't going to really bother the researchers, that was going to work within the researcher's workflow. And the researcher's workflow is, granted, every researcher is going to have a slightly different workflow, but keep things at a level where they using some common tools so they could at least not be horribly bothered by a data management system. So the strategy was to address those goals was to put together a project that would allow people to collaborate on data sets, store those data sets, and distribute those data sets securely. So the Great Northern worked with the USGS on the ScienceBase project. ScienceBase is an information aggregation and distribution system. It's a way for users to both create metadata, store metadata, create data sets, store data sets, and distribute these. The way it generally works is that you have, there's ways within ScienceBase to discover and harvest data and metadata to bring that in and keep it in one location. If you think in terms of a project, they may have a variety of resources they want to catalog, and so this will help them do that. It provides ways for people to collaboratively develop data sets, to work across both agency and geographic boundaries on the same data set to build a landscape version of that data set. It also allows some model developers to do collaborative model building using some tools. There's some metadata development tools. Now, researchers love metadata. Just mention it to them, their eyes light up. So we're trying to make it a little less onerous, try to make sure the metadata collection, which has to happen, as Leslie pointed out, you have to have standards. You have to collect this, but to try to make it, to infer as much as we can from the data they have. Somebody uploads a data set, the system makes a lot of guesses on it, tries to pre-fill as much of the metadata as possible. You're still required to fill in some stuff that the system's never going to know about, like why you did this, but at the same time, you can get through some of the big annoying parts of it. And a real big thing that the Great Northern really pushed and really was instrumental in putting together was ways for GIS analysts to not just collaborate to build the data sets, but actually to use those data sets in model runs, in in basically, as Jim pointed out, using tools that they're familiar with to use those data to build derivative data sets or analyses that they could load back into the system and keep in the project space. So this is a talk about data management, and so we got to say, so how does this all help data management? And so the LC-MAP project allows each LCC to keep track of all its data projects, adding them to a repository. I mentioned this before. It lets LCC-based projects, and this includes partners, people working with LCCs, things that are of interest to LCCs, build their own derivative data sets, track versions, build metadata. And as Jim pointed out, you've got to let people control their own spaces, their own collections, their own data. It provides ways for each LCC or each project even to control access, to make sure there's branding associated, make sure that there's acknowledgement of these data sets. It also provides a mechanism for the LCC as a whole, the National Integrated Program, or someday as a National Integrated Program, to find out what the other LCCs are working on. Right now, the Great Northern is the people that have pushed this the most, but the Southern Rockies, a neighbor, the Great Plains, also neighboring LCCs, and now the North Pacific, are interested in looking at it as well. This makes a lot of sense. You're going to cross jurisdictional boundaries, so you might as well work in the same system. The system itself takes care of a lot of the annoying data protection and policy pieces. Data management is about data protection, security, archiving, making sure these data can be distributed when people need it. If somebody publishes a paper and somebody asks, where's the data set for that? Data management means that you're providing those data set. That transparency part that was mentioned earlier on. So some examples, real quick examples, data set collaboration. This is just a screenshot. The example use here is that LCC cooperators can upload their data. They can use in this case, they were trying to do an edge match of multiple state databases into a landscape theme, and then capture that product and develop the metadata. The data then gets reviewed by an LCC manager to determine what the distribution is. Who can see it? Is it just the LCC right now? Can it go beyond that? Even at some point to the public. Second is data analysis. Right now there's a project going on working with the North Central CSC about doing some analysis on some phenology data. In this case, an LCC set up a space and they're storing all their model components, all of their workflow tracking tools. In this way, they can collaborate on the model building. And in this case, this was the Great Northern group basically built an ArcGIS toolkit. And they could connect from their desktops, access the components, load up the toolbar into their ArcGIS, run the model, and upload and capture the results and upload them back into the system. Again, sort of that whole workflow, that whole life cycle planning in your tool. This is the last slide before we go into the discussion. This is really important. So Leslie talked about the fact that NatureServe, it's providing standards-based collections. States are building these collections in NatureServe, and then Leslie is providing web services so people can get to those data without having to actually go to the site. It's a machine can read their data. Jim talked about Data Basin, where it's basically working in the cloud, and it's taking in web services that the data can be anywhere. And Jim's tools, as long as the data is provided in the right way, Jim's tools can give a variety of ways for people to integrate data sets, to do analysis, to generate map products. When Whitney was talking about the state-level data sets, you always think, oh gosh, another portal. How am I going to keep track of all this stuff? No, it's really easy now. Whitney's tools, the stuff that California is working with, again, provides web services and can consume the web services that LC-MAP provides. So if there's data that LC-MAP has that we're sort of the repository for, that Leslie or Jim or Whitney need, they can get to it inside of their website, inside of their tools. And this is an example of a toolkit we have, which is basically it's a visualization. This guy right down here actually is reading the data from LC-MAP. Its data is loaded into LC-MAP. It's stored there. It's distributed as web services. And the person who actually wrote this tool down here, this doesn't live anywhere near LC-MAP's storage utility. It's a designer just grabbed the data, styled it the way they wanted, and delivered it in the way that the community wanted to see it. And that's what's available today. So when we're talking about data management, we'll move on to the discussion part. Data management, it doesn't mean you have to have all your data in one place. It just means that you have to conform to standards, you have to make sure that it's protected, and that the groups like Databasin, NatureServe, and California and the states can read the data, find the data that you have. So I'll pass this back to Sean.
How about a quick round of applause for all of our speakers? Here's everyone's contact information, and of course I'm always available for any of these discussions, especially as they revolve around LCC. What we really want to do is spend the next 15 minutes is kind of doing some groupthink here. Get some feedback from what you guys have heard about, some other things you might not know about, or some other processes, or what do you think is missing? Where are the gaps? So please, we have a microphone here, and this. Anybody?
We might be able to hear him all right, Sean, if it might just save you a little running around.
It's a bit of a topic specific. I think the conservation groups have done a better job with threatened and endangered species and tracking those. Yet you see a lot of LCCs concerned with invasive species. So I don't know if the people on the panel or anyone in the room could talk about if there's any concerted effort across LCCs or nationally to track invasive species data management.
Well, I could talk to an effort that actually was started by a few of our natural heritage programs. It's called IMAP Invasives. Is Colorado involved in that? IMAP? Okay.
We explored it and they've decided to.
Well, I just, so I think there's maybe at this point 6 or 7 states that are tracking invasives. Really, it's meant to capture the movement and when they are coming in to areas and trying to prioritize which ones you need to be addressing as soon as possible. And it's a tool that was developed. It's an online tool, and it's being propagated throughout at least the Natural Heritage Network for the programs who really are prioritizing those issues.
And can everybody hear okay, or do we need to use the microphone? Are you okay? And if you, can you hear? Well, let's. A little bit. Okay, so just try to increase the volume and stand if you're asking a question then.
So this is Robin O'Malley. This is a question for either Tim or Sean. Science-based, and I know enough to be dangerous about this, there are federal rules about federal security and data access inside the firewall, et cetera. Have you gotten it so that folks who are not feds can have the same kind of access in the work groups that you've created as feds can, so that's a transparent, those barriers are no longer there in terms of that sort of access?
Yeah, the access to LCMAP is available to anyone. It's free, it's online, it's working right now. You need a username and password, obviously, so we can handle the security issues. From that state perspective, if a state or some other organization that was concerned about, for example, something like FOIA, which is a lot of our state partners are, the process to handle that data is to have the states or that entity deliver their information as a web service. We can harvest that information through LCMAP or through Databasin or any one of these other portals, such that the data always resides where the state wants it. And so we're sort of moving to that new networked world where the data passes through the internet but doesn't have to be loaded on multiple servers. And what you achieve by doing that is that states who are concerned about having their data exposed to something like FOIA no longer have to put their data onto a federal server. They just provide it via web services, and it's all interoperable.
My question is about data sharing. I think it's not directed to any particular speaker, but more to the maybe the information management working group. At what level are there efforts to streamline data sharing for LCCs? I mean, some particularly onerous data sets to acquire, just as an example, might be FIA data, or anything that has potential endangered species, restricted status, anything associated with private lands. There are many data sets that are of extreme value in conservation planning that LCCs
guys in black that are here assessing costs, think about how much it costs for a researchers independently over and over and over and over again to try to acquire the same data sets. And there's really no clear, streamlined path to do that. It seems like it should be a top-level issue, not a bottom-level issue.
No, I think that is a great point, and I've heard that a couple of times. You know, it's a hard nut to crack. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff to kind of work through on that, but it's a good reminder that that's really important and could be a real value add. So it's something to keep in mind.
Again, I emphasize that I don't think it can be cracked from the bottom. It needs to be cracked from the top.
And you're right, because what you're talking about is really the technical solution to this is there today. The administrative solution is not. And so that's at a very high level.
You know, don't forget that there are some really important reasons to keep data secure, and so just because a researcher wants it doesn't mean that they necessarily should have it. Now, I'm not advocating for to walk out of the room with no, you know, plan in place, but what we're trying to, we need to sort of find that balance between security and data delivery, and in some cases that needs to be real project by project. FIA is a great example. The reason that you can't get locations for the plots in FIA is because there's legislation behind it that limits its distribution. So, you know, changing an act of Congress can be a little bit onerous, but at the same time, you know, at the project level, if you're able to sort of develop those relationships, then, for example, something like LC-MAP can help you secure that data such that your partners, in this case the Forest Service, are confident that it's not going to slip out the back door and they no longer have control over what they developed. It's an ongoing discussion.
Related to that, it seems like the LCCs and the climate science centers are in the best position to kind of encourage more of that interagency and partnership data sharing with very secure security set up. And we spent 2 years going to every field office, BLM, NRCS, Forest Service, and it's like, it shouldn't just be us going through that, and somebody else is going to have to go through that same effort. So plot data, I think, is a big issue, and these landscape assessments, you get better information across the landscape with the more plot data you have. I would hope LCCs and CSCs can help us push that.
Yeah. So our model is LC-MAP, and to provide that data cross-platform, just the way you said.
Sure way.
Yes. Yep.
Given how network connected all of these different databases are, what's the potential for automatic updates of data sets that are living in these systems? So, for example, if the CNDB is updated, is it an auto update or is that a manual update that needs to occur when we do some personal management? Just because there's so many, as we're talking about, there's so many data sets that are being updated on multiple sites, how do we ensure that they're current in these servers?
Right. You're talking about the future here, but the not too distant future. Sometime later on in the 2010s, we as a society will be moving to a networked information sharing. It's already done in many walks of life. And so the short answer to your question is when we achieve that, the data proprietor and the data creator is going to house data on their server or on their portion of the cloud. And as they update that data, that updated data will be delivered via web services to the portals. It's like a giant smorgasbord where every time you walk in, there's a new tray of food out there because it's always constantly updated. And when you want to pick something, you're not picking it off of your hard drive or your agency's network. You're pulling it off of the cloud, and it's the most recent version of the data available. We're going to achieve it. It's going to be a couple of years, but everyone needs to go home and convince their agency that that's where the future is. It occurs in all kinds of other walks of life, and conservation just needs to catch up with it.
No, I wanted to add to that because this is something we struggle with as well, and the versioning issue. And there are certainly ways to do it right now that you can, when you log into Webmaster Service, it'll be whatever the latest is. But we need to be careful in a couple of ways. Analytically, it's difficult to do that in some circles technically right now. So you want to use a version that's stable and you can run analytics against. That's the first point. The second point is for certain kinds of data sets, you want multiple records. We've been working on a project have to think carefully about which things do we want to keep routinely automated to do updates and then cancel the old stuff, and be thoughtful about those things that we want to retain as a historical record. I think that's really important not to lose sight that it's not always the latest is the best.
This one, and, yeah, did you, yes, by the door?
I'm Debbie Greenberg for All Points GIS. We do a lot of work with the Forest Service, so I'm speaking in more broad sense. But the ESRI user group, federal user group meeting that was just held in Washington, D.C., the big thing that we're rolling out is all the various agencies involved in the federal data management and federal GIS platform. Is that a concept that's familiar here? It is what you're talking about. It is, it's coming. The agencies are signed up. That's part of the stewardship plans are in place.
Yeah, I'm not the expert on this, but for example, the Department of Interior has a IT process where they're planning on moving to the cloud. It's going to be as I said, occur sometime in the future here. And I think the take-home point from my perspective is that it's back to this kind of buffet smorgasbord approach, is that no one portal or no one access point is going to solve all the problems. But if we have a number of them and they're all interoperable, then you'll be able to enter the data stream where you need to, have the tools available that you want to use, and access the data through the services. And so it's sort of, the network is real, and you have plenty of access points to choose from. That help?
So there are more questions, just wanted to check, Sean, did you want to ask again if there are any other tools that people wanted to suggest, or just take a couple more questions before Mike wraps it up?
Yeah, sure. How much time do we have?
About 5 minutes.
Okay. Does anybody have any burning desire to tell us about a data management system or a tool or a portal in place that we haven't discussed yet or hasn't been talked about in the meeting at large?
I don't have a tool, Tom did it, but I wonder, has there been a discussion on having a library of tools so that all these neat little products that involve, whether it's analysis or real simple stuff, you can go there, download it, perhaps change it for your application, but with so much work being done, our creativity seems to be great to have a single source to go to.
The session I was in earlier today, some of you might have been in there, the Land Trust for Public Land and the Lincoln Institute are building just that kind of this database that describes and allows access or provides access to a variety of tools. That's the kind of thing that we're going to need to handle in a wiki, though, because just like the data, the tools that are available are constantly popping up, and there's no way you could sort of put them all in one database. It's a situation where we're going to go back and use the web resources to help us catalog that stuff, and those catalogs can then be accessible in the same way that the data can. What's the name of that group? The Trust for Public Lands. Check their website, because they're working on it.
Any other tools or things for Sean? And if not, we probably have time for 2 more questions. Did you have a tool?
Well, just in the Satellite LCC, we've been evaluating platforms, and so we've been looking at databases. We're looking for that more kind of non-technical thing. So we are also looking at Landscope. So that's just another available tool out there that has some strengths and weaknesses compared to some of the ones we talked about today.
What was that name? Landscope?
Landscope, yeah.
That's NatureServe, isn't that right? You want to care to say something about Landscope?
Well, I just encourage you also to check it out. It is more of a user-friendly, truly a story-based application that is a resource out there. I was also going to mention another resource, the EVM Tools Network. It's evmtools.org, I believe. This captures information about all of the ecosystem-based management, specifically at this point related to coastal marine management tools that are available. So it gives you a suite of tools. It talks a little bit about what they are and what the intent of them are, and some user stories in terms of how these tools are being used. So that's a resource for folks who need to deal with coastal issues.
Yeah, probably one more. How about someone here?
In California, we're developing California Climate Conservation Commons, which is a site that is cataloging a bunch of tools, providing links to web resources, and also hosting some high-quality data sets, and that's eventually going to be user is the California Climate Conservation Commons. It's very beta right now, but if you Google that, you'll actually find that.
We'll take one more. And go ahead, one of the two of you.
The Buffalo Midwest Red Flags is supporting an effort to develop something we've been calling the IDMS, Integrated Data Management System. And it's really just a scoping for a really a conservation enterprise system that starts everything from data to tracking landscape scale conservation projects. It's got about 7 modules. We're focusing on beginning to populate actually the implementation modules, following some pilot projects that are going on in the region. And my pitch is we need something that really is like that, kind of one of these one-stop shopping, and it's too big for anyone LCC to support. It's a struggle already to continue to support it.
And Brian, is the Illinois Natural History Museum the primary sponsor of that, or?
No, it's actually the Nature Conservancy is working with some folks who are kind of focused around the Nicolay Schwammagott National Forest, working in Green Bay. Those are the pilots that are using to develop it. But it's Scott Soa and Paul Seelback, USGS.
Okay. Well, Sean, going back to your opening slide, I think you and your team hit a home run here this last hour collectively. And one more round of applause for you.
I would just finish up by saying that the data management working group of the LCC, we do need more participation. And so I encourage you to contact me. We'll give you opportunities at the level you're looking to be interested in. And if it's not you, then the person who's more responsible for data in your organization. Please have me contact me. Thanks, everyone.
We have about, I believe, an hour and 15-minute break for lunch. We'll reconvene at 12:45 in the various breakout rooms. Thanks again.